Welcome to Founder Radio. I'm your host, Hugo. In this podcast, you'll hear in-depth conversations with the globe's most exciting company founders. We'll talk about their ideas, their successes, their challenges, and their learnings along the way. At Founder Radio, we celebrate founders, and we believe that innovative founders are critical to deal with the challenges humans face. They are society's explorers and work in uncertainty to expand our practical knowledge each and every day. Building something from scratch requires creativity, intelligence, conviction, and endurance. Get inspired and learn from those that are changing the world. Hello everyone, thanks for listening to Founder Radio. I'm very excited today to talk to Kim Durand. Kim is from Paris originally. He has a master's in aeronautical engineering and finance, so we're talking to a clever dude today. He joined Uber in 2014, spent 7 years there, and then the last 2 of those he spent in Mexico City, and that's where he started Cheaf. About 4 years ago now, Cheaf is a marketplace app basically to sell food that's close to the expiry date at a massive discount. So it reduces food waste, it puts some more money in the pockets of the merchants, and it's also great for consumers. They get access to really high quality food at super low prices. We'll go into much more depth, but that's a very brief summary of what Cheaf does. Kim, great to talk to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Cheaf, and very good pronunciation of my last name, by the way. Congrats.
Great, thank you. Was that a decent summary of what Cheaf does too?
This very, very decent summary of what Cheaf does. I'm used to explaining it in Spanish. I explain it in English when I talk to investors, but great that you did it for me, actually. Much better.
My pleasure. How did you get the idea?
Honestly, because the last 2 years that I was working at Uber, as you said, I was in Mexico and I was in charge of part of the market for Uber Eats. So I had this knowledge of the tech industry, obviously, from the 7 years that I spent at Uber. I had the knowledge of the Mexican restaurant industry. And also, I think Uber is a super good entrepreneur machine or factory. So I obviously had the idea of launching a company, but I wanted to use it in a way that would use the skills and experience that I had acquired in these years. No, so I wanted to launch a food tech, and I wanted to do it with impact. So if you think about food tech and impact, very quickly food waste comes into play. And doing a little bit of benchmark of what was happening in Europe, what was happening in the US, etc. I think the marketplace one was the most attractive to me. Like the marketplace model was the most attractive to me, also because my experience at Uber, and I thought I could do a decent job there. And also I thought that Mexico was an appropriate market for it because there's absolutely no awareness of the issue of sustainability, but there's a lot of social issue there. Big percentage of people living in poverty, like between 40 and 50%. So I thought that there was something to be done around rescuing to help the poorest populations and also help the environment.
Awesome. And how did the run up to quitting and really getting started with Cheaf look like? What did you prepare? How did you do that?
So pandemic hit. And at that moment, that was a big hit actually for Uber. 1/3 of the company was fired, including a big part of my team actually. And at that point, I was 7 years in. I thought that Uber was becoming a little bit more corporate. I think I'm more of the startup style. I was already thinking about the next step, and I thought this is the right moment to go. So I was preparing. I was also 30 years old at that moment. It was also the year 2020. So I thought this is the right moment to make a change. No? So I thought about doing something different, and the pandemic, I think, accelerated it. And also I was reading a bunch of books at that moment to help me get started with entrepreneurship. And I think at that moment, I was reading probably, I don't remember exactly what book that was, but I was reading one book that basically was telling to the reader, hey, fuck it, try it. What's the worst that can happen? That was more or less the conclusion of the book. And I was like, yeah, that's true. What's the worst that can happen? Like what really worst case, I fail. And that's all. I'd have sacrificed a little bit of my personal comfort, but I honestly don't care. I'm not interested in money, etc. So why not trying? No? And I took my laptop and I started writing like some kind of business plan. I contacted a bunch of universities to hire an intern on social media. And I went to see a bunch of restaurants around me and I got started.
How was the first year?
Tough. I think actually I heard a podcast recently where someone was saying launching a company is a vessel for self-improvement disguised as a money-making enterprise. And I think that's really it. I think originally I was super control freak, very anxious, and I was updating the data every 20 minutes. And when the business was going down, I was feeling down. When the business was going up, I was feeling up. This is definitely not healthy. So basically, it helped me to know me better, try new things, to be a little bit more healthy in my habits. I started developing new habits that are very healthy. So I go to the gym more or less every day. I read every day. I listen to podcasts every day. I try to write pretty often. All these things that basically for me are helping with mental health that I didn't have in the first year. So the first year was basically pushing me towards the wall and getting me to understand that I needed to make a big change in the way I was thinking about me and my business and the place that my business had into my life. Otherwise, I would just not work long term. So I think that was very, very tough mentally speaking, but that prepared me to be a much more mature human and professional, I think.
How did that help you? Because when I listen to you, you say much more fitness, much more reading, much more podcasts. It sounds like there's a part like physical fitness, but also maybe a form of focus. How did that change how you operated as a founder?
So for me, the gym typically is not about physical health. It's about mental health. It's about having 1 hour where I can think about something else or listen to something else or not think about the business. So I have a big spike of frustration. I go to the gym and then I'm back and I'm a little bit better. So I think that's it. It's when you launch a business, you spend basically all your waking hours thinking about the business. So if you don't find a way to at least have a few hours where you can think about something else and have the mind focused on something else, so you can get back with a fresh view on things, less frustration and a little bit more productivity in mind, you can do much. So I figured at least that worked for me. I was not really about routine. Actually, I hated the routine. Whenever I got into a routine, I wanted to get out of it. So I was like, yeah, that's great. I'm the kind of get out of the comfort zone kind of guy. But really, it's not particularly healthy. And when you're doing that, when you're launching a company, you're perpetually outside of your comfort zone. So you don't need to do much more than that. So I think being grounded a bit more with habits like going to the gym or getting your coffee in the morning or reading like 30 minutes every day or something like that, that helps you thinking about something else, that helps you being grounded a little bit and feel that you have a little bit of more probably control over your life, that helps you feel that you're growing intellectually and personally outside of your work. Like overall, I think it's full positive.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. It puts work in its place a little bit as well. If I listen to you, and what kept you going? Like say after year one, you kept pushing. You started to see some traction. Like what were the highlights when you think back at that time?
The big milestones of the first year were fundraising rounds. So after 3 months, I went to raise like some kind of friends and family rounds, like 550K, something like that. I was very lucky that the network that I had, that was not particularly hard. And then we had a massive chance to acquire 1 or 2 big chains in Mexico, which were big signals to go for like a bigger round afterwards. And also it was 2021, which is probably the best year in terms of fundraising that you can ever think in the benchmark in the past 20, 30 years. So we went to raise a lot of money. And from then we also acquired a mindset of being very, very precarious with the money and very, very careful with the money, in a way that we have a lot of runway to think about strategies and to think about pivots and to think about traction and etc., especially in markets that are slow and especially in B2B enterprise. So basically there was like, okay, I have a lot of runway. I can test a lot of things, comfortable basically with the situation. I'm not stressed out with the fact that I'm going to have to raise money again in 6 months. And also I have this runway, so I have to get going until there's no runway. So there's that. It's kind of like, it's not that I'm obligated to get going, but hey, I have it. I'm not particularly stressed out about money. I can try new things. Well, let's do it. No,
gives a lot of peace as well. I imagine peace of mind.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like we didn't have a lot of competition back then. We have a little bit more now, but we were and we still are actually the only marketplace, like food waste marketplace in Latin America that raised institutional rounds. So that kind of positioned us as a potential winner in the market. And it's a winner-take-all market. We had like short-term plan to expand to other countries. We had a little bit of traction in Mexico. So basically the plan was exciting and we were learning a lot in the process. So overall, that combined with the fact that you don't have to worry too much about funding, I think is the right combination.
Yeah. And we're a couple of years in now. You've seen incredible traction. You mentioned a couple of huge partnerships. You mentioned that the team has grown until almost 30 people, if I recall it correctly. I'm sure there's still struggles. How have they changed? And also, how have the highlights changed? I imagine it's a completely different world for you as a founder.
Yeah, 100%. I think, so now we're in 2 countries and we're going to be in 4 by the end of the year. So that the panorama is very different. And also, we struggled a lot in Mexico because it's a very big market with a lot of inertia, with a culture of not pushing necessarily super hard for new things, and with no awareness of sustainability. And in contrast, we went to Chile, that is a very European style kind of country in Latin America. And we got a traction that is absolutely exceptional. Like we got to twice the size of Mexico in 5 months.
Really?
And we figured that, okay, so this is like, that made us understand really what is product market fit, what is a market that works, what is a market that doesn't work, and what we should be looking for, what we should be focusing on to get to the growth and traction and leadership that we wanted to have. So I think we have a much clearer picture of what the market is, what's working, what's not working. I think we're positioning ourselves as the leaders in Latin America. And I think that's very important because, again, this is kind of a winner-take-all market. And also the first mover advantage is very important. So overall, we feel we're very like a much more mature company. We are gathering a lot of interest from investors. We are gathering a lot of interest from the press. And overall, I think we're positioning ourselves as a company that looks much bigger than it is. And not only in Chile, but also in Mexico. And I think we are managing to do that because we're believing it for ourselves, I think. It's like, yeah, we think that we can be this big company. We think that we don't really care about being a unicorn or anything, but we think that we can have massive impact in the mid to long term. And we think that we're positioning ourselves as a potential winner to get there. So believing it makes us feel confident right now. And I think that shows to the external world.
Yeah. And what are the drivers for success? You already mentioned first mover advantage. What do you think are the key things to get right in your business?
Let's see. I think knowledge of the market is very important. And I'm saying that with virtually no knowledge of the markets that I'm in, but much more than I had before. But basically, in Mexico for 3 years, we never understood really if we had an issue with talents in the team or an issue with the market or the products. We never really understood it. The fact that we launched Chile helped us understand much more, basically, if we had an issue with the market or the team. So that positioned us a little bit more, like a little bit better in terms of what we can expect from the market. I think we understand now that, one, we need to be very well positioned with retail because retail is half of the problem and is very concentrated. So it's basically about acquiring, like having probably 5 big chains as your client and you're solving 50% of the problem. I'm exaggerating, but that's basically it. Obviously, this is retail, so this is a multi-year negotiation cycle, but still. And 2, it's about also understanding that it's not only about social impacts, it's also very much about environmental impact. And if you don't have that, if you don't have the awareness of the environment or the sustainability in the market, it's probably not going to work. And that's a big learning that we got from Mexico, where we thought with the issue that we have socially, definitely this is going to work. And yes, this is working user-wise. Like we are getting a lot of users, a lot of final users. We have like 1.5 million. But this is not working business-wise because the businesses, if they are not pushed by the population or if they are not pushed by the governments to adopt measures like for sustainability or against food waste, they're not going to do it. And they're going to be more worried about the brand image or the bad brand image that they can get by selling products for discounts or by selling products that are close to their expiry dates, then they're going to be excited by the potential impact, positive impact that they can have on society or the environment. I think big learning that we get from Mexico doesn't mean that it can't work. We get traction anyway, but you can see that like from the negotiation cycles that we get or from the excitement that we're feeling from the businesses here, that this is not a market that is appropriate for a product like Cheaf yet.
You spoke a lot about the impact angle. I had in mind that the financial side of your business model was very relevant as well. So for the consumers, they get a huge discount on food. And for the merchants, they get to sell food that otherwise would be thrown away. Is that a motivator for both sides of the marketplace or not so much?
So that's the main motivator for the final user. it's not particularly such, I mean, that's probably the best argument that we have for the businesses, but it's not enough in general to break the barriers. Because like if you think of a supermarket that has like 2% waste, well, they can get back 0.8% maybe, let's say. It's margin in general because there's very little marginal cost associated to it. But still, like they don't necessarily see it as something particularly exciting, like when they think about 0.8%, even though this is a massive amount of money really. And they're comparing the 0.5, 0.6, 0.8% of additional revenue to the processes that they're going to have to build, the people that are going to have to take care of these processes, the operation that it means for them, the potential hiring that it means, the potential bad impact in terms of brand image that they're going to get, etc., etc., etc. And if you're in a culture also where people don't want to fuck it up, honestly, they don't want to take unnecessary risks, because if they go to the decision table saying, I have this project and I think this is going to work and this doesn't work, then the potential negative impact is worse than the potential impact for that person specifically, professionally. So it's hard also to find someone that's going to bring the project to the table and defend it internally. If you have laws or if you have pressure from society, it's much easier.
Are you typically a supply or demand constrained?
Super supply constraint, massively supply constraint. Like basically we have like for each user on the platform, we have for each box on the platform waiting to be rescued, we have 20 users fighting for it.
Oh, wow. Okay. And is it hard to make money? Like for you as a business, can you imagine like the prices have to be low, your take rate might not be huge, like financially speaking, is this a good model?
So you have to be good at economies of scale and you have to be good at cost efficiency for sure. And you have to be able to prioritize very well. Obviously, like the basket size is much lower than the delivery platform. The commission is more or less the same, but you need a lot of volume to get to profitability. Or you need to be able for each people that you have on the team to take a lot of revenues, basically. So you need to be able to drive a big business with very few people. I think that's the hard thing, and that requires a lot of prioritization, that requires a lot of cost efficiency, and that requires a lot of being able to sacrifice a few things to take care of the most important ones.
Yeah, got it. And is there a lot of competition?
So in Latin America, there's some now. In Mexico, there's not. Like there were a few like competitors before we launched, but they were kind of small. Now they don't exist anymore. And in Latin America, like the most competitive market is Brazil. And then you have Chile. And then very far behind, you have Argentina and Colombia and Peru. But this is not huge yet. We need to choose the market very carefully when we launch, definitely, because it's very likely that what we're seeing in Mexico is going to replicate somewhere else. So Chile is definitely not representative, I think, of Latin America. Brazil is probably a very good market to launch, but it's also a monster. So that's what we need to figure out. But yeah, in general, it's a little bit competitive, but definitely not as much as Europe right now.
And do you see applications of this model to other sectors? Like food is, in my mind, an awesome place to start for the impact angle. It's perishable, but also maybe clothing or furniture, or there's other applications that I can think of. Have you explored those, and what are your thoughts on that?
So explored a little bit, but the vision that we have for Cheaf is to become like the leading sustainability platform for LATAM in 2030, let's say. And that doesn't just mean food waste. That means any kind of waste that can create negative CO2 impact. So talking to a few retailers, for instance, they were pushing us to try and position ourselves on the electronic side of things, because typically they have factories, like entire factories with fridges or microwaves, etc., that are not fashionable anymore, so that people are not going to buy anymore. And this, if they go to the trash, generate a massive impact environmentally as well. So this is something that I want to be positioned on at some point in the next 4 to 5 years, let's say. But there's a lot of work to be done in terms of food waste first, obviously.
Can you imagine? Yeah.
Food waste at the distribution level, meaning supermarkets, restaurants, etc. There's a lot to be done also at the production level, at the transport level. So there's a big impact to be had there before.
If you look at the company now, what excites you most? What gets you up in the morning? What makes you excited? What do you enjoy most in your life as a CEO and founder of this company?
I would say 3 things. I think expanding internationally, I think it's very exciting when you start a founder, because I mean, at Uber, I think we're used to it, but this is not the norm, I think. And expanding internationally with massive partnerships and a lot of traction is even more exciting. So we managed to launch Chile very, very successfully. Good hopes for a lot of the for some of the other markets that we're going to launch. And I'm very excited about the fact that we're going to be present in 4 to 5 countries in the next 12 to 18 months. I think this is awesome as a startup founder, and a lot of us, I think, don't have that. So this is great. Second is the impact, honestly, because I think what makes us happy to wake up in the morning is that we're not just looking at GMV or revenues or EBITDA, or whatever. We're also looking at number of kilos of food saved. And we're seeing this number increase literally day by day. We're like somewhere around 10,000 kilos every day now. So this is super exciting because this is very measurable, and the impact is not just in terms of financial, it's also in terms of what it means for the environment and the population that we're helping. So I know it sounds bullshit, but this is really like the reason why we launched it in the beginning. And I think everyone in the team has this culture of having an impact. And I think this makes the company much more exciting than a lot other that are more focused on the financials. And finally, I think despite a lot of the frustration that we're feeling in markets where we don't have the traction that we'd like to have, we're very excited about the idea to crack the code, I think. So generally speaking, thinking long term, in 1 to 2 years, we're convinced that there's going to be a Cheaf Mexico, and that's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. We're not there yet, and we hope this is going to be us. And we know that there's something to be found to get to this point of inflection. And I think even though day by day we're very frustrated, and I want to punch someone in the face 3 times a day, generally speaking, like thinking long term, we're like, this is a massive market. The impact that we can have there is absolutely enormous, and we're going to get there at some point, I'm sure. Yeah. So this is exciting as well.
Totally, can you imagine? And it is gigantic. How do you deal with that frustration you mentioned? What do you do? Do you have a nice little routine or a way of letting off steam?
Yeah, so the habits that I mentioned are basically here for that. Honestly, there are times when I can feel this is not productive anymore, and this is not constructive or productive, and I need to do something about it. So my co-founder and I, we started doing coaching very recently. Like we had our first session recently, and let's see what happens. I think therapy honestly helps. And I think focusing on markets that work or products that work, or focusing on other things that are not the most frustrating one. Like I think like for me, launching Argentina is very exciting. So, hey, let's focus a little bit on this. Convincing a big retail chain in Chile to work with us is also exciting. It's not particularly exciting to spend 2 years to try and sell hot dogs in cines, like for sure in Mexico. And that's a true story. So whenever I feel this kind of frustration, I try to switch my focus, to shift my focus somewhere else where this is more productive, and then get back to it with a problem solving kind of mindset. But honestly, I'm not going to lie, this is not easy.
How does the coaching help you?
So for now, I only had the first session, but I think this first session, and honestly, I'm not skeptical, but let's see what happens. The first session was about really thinking about the pillars that I have in my life and how solid I think they are. And just seeing it represented as a graph, let's say, makes you feel that, hey, like the vast majority of what I have in my life is fine. So yeah, I'm very frustrated about this one thing out of the 8 other pillars that I have. But hey, let's focus a little bit on this. This is working well. So let's use a little bit of this positive energy to make this score of this thing that is not working as well as I'd like, push a little bit closer to the 10 out of 10. So I think it helps taking a step back and see things with a bit more relativity. And I think this is very important as CEOs, honestly, to be able to do that. Because if you're stuck with the frustration of the day-to-day, then you're not able anymore to think long-term. And I think this is where the company goes to shit.
Love to check in on this coaching a year from now. The first session sounds like a very productive one. You already mentioned that you changed a lot in this role, but I was wondering, do you think there are any like real character traits that you need as a founder to succeed? So the unchangeable parts of your character or other founders' character that you think are indispensable?
Interesting, because I'm thinking a lot about this these days, even though I don't have the answer. I think what's very interesting to me is that when you look at the most well-known founders or CEOs, generally speaking, you can't pinpoint to a specific trait or specific characteristics that are common to all of them. If you compare Elon Musk to the CEO of Microsoft, I can't see anything very... Obviously, there are things in common, but it's very hard to say this is the basis that they have in common. If you compare Richard Branson to Zuckerberg, same thing. So I think there are many ways to be a CEO. I think there are some common grounds that you need to have, and I think resilience is probably a big one. Resilience and a very healthy mentally. So resilience, and I would probably ask the risk-taking kind of things, at least for a founder CEO. I think risk-taking and resilience is very, very important, especially early stage, because you need to be able to adjust your strategy, do it fast, and take risks. And you need to be able to cope with the potential negative impact of whatever you're doing. And you need to be able to handle the pressure of making decisions that might be very harmful to the business. Also, generally speaking, this is kind of a little bit solitary, this role. Even though you have co-founders, etc., ultimately you're responsible for whatever happens to the company. So if you made a bad decision and the company goes down, then this is your fault. So I think handling this pressure and being resilient to it is very important. And I think this is something that can be built over time, honestly, even though if you take the first step to launch a company, you probably have a little bit of that, I'd say. And then being healthy mentally, I think this is what I built over the past 3 to 4 years. If you don't have that, I think very easily you can inspire a culture that is not super healthy. You can make decisions based on bad emotions instead of based on rational facts and data. I'm not saying that if you have a healthy mindset, then you're never going to do that. But I think in most cases, you have a way to cope with these emotions and say, okay, let's take a step back and make the best decision possible. So I think this is what I would encourage a lot of founders / CEOs, especially in early stage companies that don't necessarily have product market fit, etc., to do, is to work a lot on that. And that can be through therapy, through coaching, through psychedelics, whatever that is, honestly. But getting there and aiming for that is absolutely critical to me.
When we worked together, I know you as a very analytical guy. The work you used to do was a lot of number crunching, getting insights out of those numbers, big data sets, etc. Your role now is very different, right? It's you're team manager, you're hiring. I imagine you're very involved with the big contracts with merchants. How was that transition for you?
So when you knew me, I was in Amsterdam, and yeah, I'm definitely a super geek and super analytical. I think you can, you know the feeling. Also, like the last role that I had at Uber was GM. I was managing the market for Uber Eats, which includes sales and includes ops, etc., etc. So that's a lot less pure data crunching, I'd say. So there's that. So I got a little bit of that experience there. And also at Uber, and I think the thing that I most valued there were, one, my bosses. All the bosses that I had virtually were absolutely excellent and probably top 5 in the people, the smartest people that I can think about, and the colleagues. And I think that's what was the strength of Uber at that point. You're surrounded by people that have so much talent that you're learning a lot on a day-to-day basis. And even though your role is specific, and in that case, it was a little bit strategic as well. It was about basically finding ways to be more cost efficient to gain market shares in the most competitive markets. Even though it's more geek and analytical than strategic, then if you have the right bosses and the right colleagues and you're in meetings with people that think strategically, etc., and at some points, and you're good at learning, which is also important, at some point you get these skills and you learn these skills and you can get good at it. And I think this is also the reason why they hired me in Mexico as a GM role, even though I was not doing anything anything related to that before. And I think this is also why I don't think I did a very, very bad job there. So I think I was kind of prepared for it through the relationships and the contacts that I had at Uber back then, and through the last role that I had at Uber Eats in Mexico.
And do you sometimes still crave the analytical side of things? I hear you allude to graphs and numbers every now and then, so it doesn't sound like you've completely ditched it, but I can imagine you sometimes long for some more number crunching. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, again, there are many ways to be CEOs, and I think I'm the geek CEO, 100%. Even though I'm doing a lot of commercial work, because you need to sell, definitely. You need to sell to clients, you need to sell to investors, etc., which is probably a bit different from what I was doing before. But everything I do is data-driven, and I think everything I think about and the way I think about it is analytical. And I think that also inspires a culture of being analytical and data-driven in the team, which I don't think is a bad thing. So yeah, I'm still doing a lot of that. I'm doing much less querying, 100%. And I'm relying a lot on people that are super geek in my team to be able to do that. And if I can help them, I do it. But I don't do it if I don't do it, it's more out of lack of time than out of not having the willingness to do it, because I like being involved in numbers 100%.
Got it. The love for numbers still there. Kim, you were born in France. You spent some time in Amsterdam. What's the story of you moving to Mexico?
So basically, whenever I had as soon as I had the opportunity to get out of France, I did it. So when I finished my studies, I went to Kuala Lumpur to launch a business with like some kind of spin-off of Rocket Internet. And this is where I understood that I wanted to launch companies. And this is also where I got to know Uber, because I was attending the launch company of Uber in 2013 in Kuala Lumpur. So this is where I said, that's an interesting company. I want to work there. From then, I came back to France because Uber was hiring locally then. And then Uber had this nomad program that were sending you to wherever in the world where you might be able to help. And at that point, I got interest from Southeast Asia and India to probably help with some work or some like tasks that they wanted help with. So I chose to go to Southeast Asia. I was based out of Singapore and Hong Kong, but I spent my time between Bangkok, Manila, and Jakarta and Kuala Lumpur. So I was traveling around like for 1 or 2 years there. And then I didn't want to go back to France. So I went to Amsterdam to work with my ex-boss, who was the CFO, and spent like 2.5 years there. I grew a lot there. And then I had another opportunity to move to a role that was much more 360 in a continent that I didn't know, Latin America. So I moved there. And in Latin America, there are 2 hubs really. It's Mexico and Brazil. I was more attracted to Mexico at that point, also because I had a little bit of knowledge of Spanish. I had at that point also this willingness to move out of my comfort zone, as I said, like get out of the routine. I felt a little bit in my routine in Amsterdam. I wanted to change. I didn't want to stay in Europe. I didn't want to go back to Asia. I had no idea about Latin America. US, I was not interested. So I said, hey, let's try Mexico. And I had this opportunity, so I moved there.
I recall there was a bit of a romantic backdrop to this as well. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I was living with my girlfriend there in Amsterdam, and then she had a job in New York. So she moved there. So I was trying to find a job in New York. And in the end, it didn't really work. And we broke up for some reason, for many reasons, actually. So I kind of entered in some kind of burnout. And I was like, everything that I have now, I want something else. So for some reason, I went to Spain to take Spanish classes. And I was like, somehow I want to speak a little bit more Spanish, but I also don't want to stay in Europe. So let's go to Latin America. I have no idea. I have no idea what's happening there. So I applied to role in Mexico. And actually, looking back, I think great decision. Like it's a very tough market, honestly, Mexico to work in, but it's a very good quality of life. Latin America is a super interesting continent. I had a super good time in Mexico, and I still have a super good time. I don't think I would have been so happy in the US, honestly. So looking back, I think it was like you always learn from the tough moments in your life. And looking back, generally speaking, you always manage to find a good spin to these moments. And looking back, honestly, like when it comes to that, I'm super happy that it happened this way.
How was your first year there? Can you take us along?
I absolutely loved it. Also because, so I thought that the role that I had at Uber was the best possible role. I thought the country was the best possible country. I had a lot of good friends there. The climate is amazing. The food is amazing. The quality of life is amazing. And also like I literally arrived in Mexico and I was sent to Baja California at the beach to launch the market there. I didn't speak a word of Spanish, virtually. So I was just there looking at the operations going on, trying to participate, but I couldn't really do anything because I didn't speak the language. So I was basically sent to the beach to be a launcher without being able to really participate. So that was honestly great. And then I was sent to a music festival to do partnerships. So I spent time at a music festival without also being able to do much. So my team was helping a lot. So I had a good time there. So honestly, originally I was like, this is almost a dream. I can't believe that I'm doing what I'm doing in the conditions that I'm doing it in. And then I pushed myself to learn Spanish very quickly, and the job was super interesting. I was also working with other countries in Mexico, in Latin America. I was working on plan to launch many more markets in Mexico. I was in charge of like somewhere around 30 cities at that point. So super, super interesting. It's just at some points, I felt that Uber was going into some like different kind of culture that was a bit more corporate. And I'm more of a startup kind of guy, I guess. So I got a little bit bored by the end. So that's why I moved to something else.
Makes sense. That sounds like an awesome first year. I wanna come over now. You've seen a lot of different places. How do you think about seeing and living in different places on the world versus anchoring in one?
Depends on the reasons that you're doing it for. I think there's a lot of value to know a lot of places and live there because it gets you easier person to integrate to any kind of environment. And it makes you probably more tolerant to a lot of different cultures and a lot of different ways of working. It makes you more curious. It makes you probably more like smarter as well, I guess. Like if you learn the languages, if you learn the local culture, if you talk to people there, etc., like you get to know more things about the world, I guess. So there's a lot of value in doing that. And I think in general, it's something that needs to keep going as much as possible. I also think that at some point, like basically I was doing that to run away from routines and run away from whatever mentally I had going on, which is not necessarily like it's a good patch. It's a good temporal patch, but it's not necessarily a good long-term solution. And I think at some point when you get to a more peaceful state of mind and a more healthy mindset, like, and you feel more healthy mentally speaking, this is where also you feel that it's good to anchor to wherever you are. It's good to have your habits and you don't feel the need to run away. And you even can get to some kind of laziness, like to the extreme, that is not healthy either. So this is where basically at some point you get to more maturity and you probably want to settle down somewhere, but you also can't forget about discovering other cultures, other places, other languages, etc., because it makes you much better and much smarter human, I think. So it's about finding the balance and doing things for the right reasons, I think.
That's beautiful. It makes a lot of sense. What have you changed your mind on the last 3 years?
Clear to me that since I launched the company, it would be very, very hard for me to get back to an employee position.
Why is that?
I think it's a very hard job to have, obviously. To launch a company, a lot of pressure. You have people counting on you. You have to manage your investors. You have boards, etc., etc. But at the same time, you're in charge and you make the calls and you make the decisions. And this is great, honestly. Like for someone like me who's not a big fan of authority, upwards and back and downwards, honestly, it's great. And I can't imagine myself taking a lot of orders from someone if I don't agree. Honestly, this is something I need to work on. Because also at some point, like after Series A, B, etc., I'm going to have a much more powerful board probably who's going to ask me to do things. But like right now, this is basically why I'm pushing back on having a board right now, because I want them to leave me alone. Basically, I'm like, my narrative is, hey, you invested in me and you invested in us. Now let us do our job. And I'd like for it to continue as much as possible. So that's it, professionally speaking. Personally speaking, also, I think I matured much more. I was convinced that I didn't want to be in a serious relationship. I was convinced that also I needed to be focused on my work, and doing that while being in a relationship was not something that was possible, etc., etc. And I think right now I'm very, very different in the way I think about it. I think on the contrary, being with the right person can help you be much more effective as a leader and as a founder and as a CEO, and also help you think about something else outside of work, etc., etc. So I think this is about maturity, honestly, on that front. So this is where I changed my mind, I think.
You're closer to anchoring romantically.
Yeah, much more adults, I think.
Good to hear. You're very driven, also idealistic, I think. A big question, but what are your values?
So it's very important for me that the best idea wins. Generally speaking, in my life. So this is also why I don't like hierarchy, even mine. I don't like making people feel that I'm the boss, because I think that being on an equal foot makes people much more open to express their ideas, and it makes them the situation much more likely to get to the best idea, I think. So first value is I don't like hierarchy. I don't know if it's a value, but I don't like to make people fear hierarchy, and I don't like hierarchy for myself. because it brings a culture where the best idea wins. I like honesty and transparency and full transparency. I'm actually sometimes have debates with people in my team around how transparent we are, because people think that if we're very transparent, then it can be seen as pessimism, for instance. Like this is not working. We don't have luck with these clients. It's very likely that within the next 6 months we're going to grow more, then etc. etc. Probably many leaders would say this is not something you want to say to your team, but I think this is better. I feel this is better because people feel that they're part of the overall story and expectations are managed correctly. So honesty and transparency, I think, very important. And accountability is also very important, to the point that I think the level of patience that I have for people when they do a bad job, not necessarily in my team. I think my team is brilliant, honestly. But when I'm talking to customer service, or when I go to the bank, or when I talk to my phone company or anything, and I feel that people are not driven to do a good job, I'm very, very pissed off. and I think it's important for people to be driven to do a good job and to be accountable for the job that they have. So I would say that, accountability, transparency, honesty, and no hierarchy. The best idea wins.
Yeah, got it. And how did you develop these? Is that mainly a thing of upbringing or certain mentors or examples that you were really impressed by? Is it something else?
Yeah, I think upbringing, definitely. My education was definitely a big part of that. I think some of the bosses that I had at Uber were like that. I can think of one in Amsterdam. Like people in Amsterdam, as you know, are very honest and very straight, very upfront and straightforward. And I like that a lot. And for some people, it can come out as very rude. I think like brutal honesty is better than turning around the bush. So definitely I get that from some of the leaders and some of the bosses that I admire most. And when I think about like the CEO, like the most well-known CEOs, or when I listen to podcasts with people that I admire, I feel that these are the kinds of traits that they have as well. So I'm like, yeah, if I admire them and this is something that they have in common, then probably it's not a bad trait to have. I understand that not everyone has the same point of view. And if you think about Elon Musk, probably a lot of people hate him because he's way too honest and way too straightforward, etc. But at the same time, I think when you're a founder and you're a CEO, I think you understand a little bit where that comes from. So yeah, I think it's a mix of education and a mix of, childhood, and a mix of my personal surrounding, professional surrounding, and the people I admire most and that I listen to or I read about. Yeah.
Is there anyone in particular, any well-known figures that you're inspired by and that you learn from and that you apply lessons from in your own life?
So interestingly, I think the two people that I would be, if you blend them together, would be the absolutely perfect human, professionally speaking, are probably Elon Musk. I know this is controversial, and Satya Nadella from Microsoft. Very, very different people. But I think Elon has everything that a founder would like to have, because like what he managed to achieve is absolutely insane, but probably not the right communication and probably not the right way to manage people, etc., etc. Even though he managed to do. No? Satya is much more of a CEO, much less of a founder, I guess. Very nice, very strategic, super smart, gives a lot of space to his people, and managed to make Microsoft get back on the picture. Never was that Microsoft was completely down, but there was a very, very likely scenario that Microsoft was going to be the next Yahoo or the next IBM. No, and definitely not the case, especially now with OpenAI. So I think I admire these people like a lot for what they managed to do and the personality that they have, and both of them for different reasons. Yeah, I don't remember what the question was, but I guess this is...
No, who you were inspired by. And I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we can merge people. So we'll be able to do that shortly. And Kim, you've very successfully founded Cheaf a couple of years ago. You already spoke about it elaborately. What would your advice be to, say, people in their 20s that have just started their business or are on the verge of starting one?
I think what pushed me to launch a business was precisely what I said in the beginning, which is this realization that what's the worst that can happen. And I think it's important to have this mindset in the beginning, because before you launch a company, it can feel very overwhelming, the amount of tasks that you need to achieve. It can be overwhelming, the amount of things that you've never done before and that you're going to need to do. A lot of admin stuff, fundraising. If you've done marketing before, you're going to have to do operations and tech and product and that kind of things. And it's very easy to think, I'm not going to be able to do that. But I think it's important to say, to think, what's the worst that can happen, and think very, very clearly about what that means for you. Because launching a business can mean sacrificing time and sacrificing money and sacrificing relationships, etc., etc. So you need to be very, very strong in terms of what you're ready to sacrifice and whether you're ready to sacrifice it, and understand what the worst that can happen if it fails. And two, it's about being self-confident. Like literally no one, I think, is able to do product and tech and marketing and ops and legal and accounting and fundraising and communication well. So there are some areas where you're going to be good and some areas where you're not going to be good. So it's about surrounding yourself with the right people, probably, or it's about learning them and be okay with the fact that at some things you're going to be great and at something you're not going to be so great. But not blocking you because you know that there are things where you don't have experience, so you're probably not so great at, because no one has ever been great at everything at once. No? So what's the worst that can happen, and figuring out that the worst case scenario is not that bad. And two, being comfortable with the fact that there are many things that you're not going to be good at, but you're going to be able to, you're going to be the same way other founders, the vast majority of other founders have managed to do it. You might manage to do it as well.
What do you recommend they do not do?
It's very important in the beginning to be able to share your ideas and work together with other people that you think are good. So doing it alone can work probably for a very short amount of time. And then at some point, you need to recognize that there are things you're not good at and you need people to help you with them. So that's probably one thing. Two, on my end, I chose to launch a company using the skills and experience that I had acquired, and in a domain that I was more or less comfortable with, meaning marketplace tech, etc., etc. And I think that helped. That helped for two reasons. One, because I felt comfortable with the products, and two, because I think when I went to raise money, my background was coherent with what I was doing, and I think it helped getting to results that we had now, that we managed to get. So I'm not saying don't launch something that has nothing to do with your area of expertise, but if you have a good idea, if you have two good ideas, one that has to do with your area of expertise and the other no, I would probably start with the first one. And this is probably a piece of advice that doesn't apply to everyone. But if you want to, in the end, launching a company is not something that is very likely to work. 99% probably of the startups that are launch fail. If you want to maximize your chances to have success, it's probably better to go where you have a little bit of expertise and experience, I guess.
Really solid advice. I second that. Listen, Kim, it's been great catching up with you. I'm super happy to see that you're doing so well. Would not have expected anything else, to be super honest. So great to see that. Appreciate you being super candid. And before we wrap up, do you have any last words or any messages you want to share with the audience?
What I just mentioned, everyone can be an entrepreneur. I think a lot of people wonder if you're born with it or if you can become an entrepreneur. I don't think obviously there are people that are born with it, but I think literally everyone can become an entrepreneur, and it's about self-confidence and about risk-taking and resilience. And I think this can be developed or this can be acquired. So if you're thinking about launching, try it. It's not the end of the world if it fails, and it might work. So that's what I would comment.
Fantastic. Thanks. Great note to end on. Kim, thanks again. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you, Cheaf.